Sir, you're bleeding internally. You could die. Those 9 words, whispered from the lips of a humble cleaning lady, hung in the balance, capable of either saving a CEO's life or irrevocably shattering her own. In the sterile, opulent environment of Harrington Industries, where power and wealth reigned supreme, Bailey Morgan possessed a secret weapon, an acute sense of smell honed by personal tragedy. When she detected the chilling scent of death emanating from a $3,000 suit, she faced an agonizing choice: remain invisible, a ghost in the machine, or speak up and risk everything. With a heart pounding in her chest, she chose, or perhaps, fate chose for her. The 30th floor, a testament to Harrington Industries' dominance, was a symphony of glass and chrome, a sanctuary of silence bought and paid for. For 2 years, Bailey Morgan had navigated these polished halls, a nameless, faceless entity, a mere fixture in the landscape. She was at the help, a category that rendered one invisible, a ghost gliding through the corridors, emptying trash receptacles while executives breezed past, oblivious to her existence. This shy, unassuming girl had perfected the art of disappearing, her ash-blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes perpetually downcast, her voice never raised above a whisper. The scars of her brother's suffering, after he'd dropped out of EMT school, had taught her a harsh lesson. Being noticed only brought pain. But on this particular Tuesday morning, at precisely 7:43 a.m., the meticulously constructed walls of Bailey's carefully curated invisibility began to crumble. Cole Harrington, the company's youngest CEO, a man who had erected impenetrable barriers around his heart after the untimely loss of his wife, emerged from the elevator, clutching his side. And Bailey Morgan's senses were assaulted by a scent that plunged her blood into icy depths. The metallic tang, sharp and unmistakable, struck her like a suppressed memory clawing its way to the surface. The smell of iron, faint, almost imperceptible to the untrained nose, but not to Bailey's. The cleaning rags slipped from her trembling fingers, landing softly on the gleaming floor. A vision of her brother's face flashed before her eyes, pale, slick with sweat, his body betraying him with internal bleeding caused by his cruel genetic disorder. That same haunting smell had permeated his hospital room just moments before the frantic rush to emergency surgery. The smell that whispered of someone dying from the inside out. Cole Harrington strode past, his jaw tight, one hand pressed firmly against his left side, beneath the flawless tailoring of his suit jacket. His face was ashen, the color leached away, and a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead despite the air-conditioned chill that permeated the floor. He doesn't know, Bailey thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. He has no idea he's bleeding to death. Every instinct in her body screamed, "Run! This isn't your problem. You're nobody to him. He won't listen to you." But the metallic scent, the undeniable aroma of iron, trailed after him like an ominous shadow. And Bailey had once stood by, paralyzed by fear, as her baby brother teetered on the brink of death. She couldn't make that mistake again. "Sir." Her voice, barely audible, was a wisp of sound, so faint she doubted he'd heard it. But Cole Harrington stopped abruptly, pivoting on his heel. His cold, dark eyes that seemed to hold a universe of pain, found her kneeling there by the baseboards. For the first time in 2 years, he truly saw her. "Did you have a fall recently?" Bailey's voice trembled so violently she could barely string the words together. I can smell iron on you and you're pale. You're holding your side. Could be internal bleeding. You need to get checked. Right now." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, like the feeling of free-falling off a cliff. Cole's expression morphed from initial surprise to something harder, more dangerous, something colder than the sterile air surrounding them. "I'm fine," he said, his voice as sharp and brittle as shattered glass. "Thank you for your concern. Stay in your lane." He turned to leave, dismissing her with a flick of his wrist. But Bailey, this timid girl who had always shied away from confrontation, found a wellspring of courage she never knew she possessed. She rose to her feet and took 3 determined steps forward, blocking his path. "Sir, please. I'm serious. And that's when a voice from behind her sent a jolt of icy fear through her veins. Wow. Do the cleaning staff diagnose people now? Chad Reynolds, the CEO's ever-present assistant, the man who had made Bailey's existence a daily torment for the past 2 years, materialized like a sleek predator who had scented weakness. He regarded Bailey with the same disdain one might reserve for a piece of trash clinging to the sole of an expensive shoe. I'm sure Mr. Harrington appreciates your creative attempt at getting his attention, Chad said, his smile dripping with venom. But perhaps you should stick to mopping floors. That's what you're actually paid for. Bailey's face burned with humiliation. Her throat constricted, making it impossible to speak. Cole Harrington said nothing. He simply turned and walked away, his hand still pressed firmly against his side, still pale as death, still bleeding. And Bailey stood there in the hallway, paralyzed, watching him disappear into the distance, knowing with absolute certainty that if someone didn't intervene, he would be dead within days. What this heartwarming yet devastating story reveals next will prove that the most powerful voice in the room is often the one everyone refuses to hear, and that one shy girl's stubborn refusal to stay silent would spark a chain of events that would change everything. But first, she would have to lose everything she had. Chad Reynolds rounded the corner, a dark storm cloud personified, his impeccably tailored designer suit a symbol of his authority. Contempt radiated from every pore. The CEO's assistant possessed an uncanny knack for appearing at precisely the wrong moment, a constant reminder of everyone's place in the rigid corporate hierarchy. He looked at Bailey with the detached curiosity one might employ when examining dirt marring the pristine surface of an expensive shoe. I'm sure Mr. Harrington appreciates your creative attempt at conversation, Chad said, his smile as sharp and dangerous as a razor's edge. But perhaps you should stick to what you're good at. Floors don't clean themselves. Cole remained silent, a statue carved from ice. He simply walked away, his hand still pressed against his side, leaving Bailey stranded in the hallway, her face aflame with shame. Back to work, Chad barked, already retrieving his phone from his pocket. Bailey grabbed her cleaning cart with trembling hands and propelled it toward the service elevator. She fought back the tears, refusing to let them fall until the doors hissed shut, enclosing her in a small metal box. Then, they came hot, shameful tears of frustration and self-recrimination. You ruined it again. You always ruin everything. Why did you speak up? 3 floors below, in the dimly lit basement security office, Mrs. Whitman watched the entire exchange unfold on her bank of monitors. The 64-year-old former military nurse had witnessed enough suffering and injustice in her life to recognize when someone was being unfairly punished for speaking the truth. She shook her head slowly, her gaze fixed on the screen. That child sees more than all of them combined, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. And they treat her like she doesn't exist. By noon, whispers had snaked their way through the building like wildfire, fueled by gossip and speculation. Bailey overheard fragments of conversations while cleaning the 15th floor break room. Did you hear? That cleaner told Mr. Harrington he's dying. Oh my God, is she insane? Probably just desperate for attention. You know how some people are. Bailey's hands trembled as she wiped down the counters, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She longed to sink into the floor and vanish completely, to erase herself from existence. At 2 p.m. she received the dreaded summons to HR. The sterile conference room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Chad sat at the head of the polished table, radiating an air of cold authority, like a judge preparing to deliver a harsh sentence. Patricia from HR sat silently beside him, her face betraying her discomfort, her eyes darting nervously around the room, unwilling to intervene. Bailey, Chad began, folding his hands on the table. We need to discuss appropriate workplace behavior. I was trying to help. Bailey stammered, her voice barely audible. Help! He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with disapproval. You approached the CEO and told him he was bleeding internally based on what? A smell? I studied to be an EMT, Bailey said quietly, attempting to defend herself. My brother has a bleeding disorder. I know the signs. Studied? Chad interrupted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Meaning you're not certified. Meaning you have no medical authority whatsoever. Meaning you overstepped spectacularly. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat but remained silent. Mr. Harrington is under tremendous stress, Chad continued, his voice unwavering. The last thing he needs is employees making wild medical accusations. If you want attention, join the company bowling league. Don't diagnose your boss with imaginary conditions. Bailey's eyes burned with unshed tears. I wasn't making it up. This is your warning, Chad said, his voice hardening. One more incident, and we'll have a very different conversation. Bailey nodded mutely, her spirit crushed, and fled the room. In the hallway, she leaned against the cool wall, struggling to catch her breath. Every time you speak, you destroy something. Maybe invisibility really is safer. Mrs. Whitman found her 20 minutes later, sobbing in the dimly lit basement supply closet. The older woman sat down beside Bailey on an overturned bucket, her silence a comforting presence. She waited patiently, allowing Bailey to gather herself. I tried to help, Bailey finally choked out, her voice thick with tears. I made everything worse. You made nothing worse, child, Mrs. Whitman said gently but firmly. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Chad said I was attention-seeking. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should just disappear and stop. Mrs. Whitman's voice was gentle, but firm. I've watched these monitors for 12 years. I've seen how people treat you like you're furniture, like you don't matter. Bailey wiped her eyes, trying to stem the flow of tears. But I also saw what you did upstairs, Mrs. Whitman continued. You noticed something nobody else did. You had the courage to speak up, knowing it could cost you everything. That's not weakness, Bailey. That's strength. But nobody believes me. That doesn't make you wrong. Mrs. Whitman took Bailey's hand in her own, her touch surprisingly strong. I smelled that same metallic scent in Iraq, on soldiers who insisted they were fine until they collapsed. You're not imagining this. That man is in danger, and you might be the only one who sees it. Bailey looked up, her eyes red and swollen. What can I do? I'm nobody. You're the one who notices, Mrs. Whitman said firmly, her gaze unwavering. And sometimes, that changes everything. Outside the dimly lit supply room, the building hummed with activity. Executives made crucial decisions. Assistants meticulously scheduled meetings. And somewhere on the 30th floor, a man pressed his hand against his side and told himself he was fine, even as his body betrayed him. But he wasn't fine, and only one person knew the truth. 2 days later, Bailey received a terse email from HR. The subject line read simply, reassignment. Effective immediately, you will cover executive conference rooms and private offices. No explanation, just a cold, impersonal reassignment. It felt like a punishment cloaked in bureaucratic language, a way to isolate her further. The executive floor was quieter than the lower levels, eerily silent, lonelier than she could have imagined. Bailey moved through the glass-walled offices like a ghost, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces, while people in expensive suits discussed numbers that held no meaning for her. She tried to suppress her thoughts of Cole, tried not to wonder if he was truly okay. But on Thursday afternoon, while cleaning the main conference room after a particularly tense board meeting, she found something that stopped her cold, something that sent a jolt of fear through her entire being. A crumpled tissue lay discarded on the polished table, a stark white against the dark wood. She picked it up, intending to toss it into the trash receptacle, and froze. The iron smell hit her like a physical blow, stronger than before, much stronger. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the tissue. He's getting worse. Bailey stood motionless, her mind racing, grappling with the weight of her knowledge. She could simply throw the tissue away. Forget about it. Stay invisible as everyone seemed to want her to. Or she could try again, knowing the potential consequences. You know what happens if you try again. Chad will fire you. Nobody will listen. But the metallic scent was undeniable. A silent scream for help. If she did nothing, If something terrible happened to Cole because she was too afraid to act, she would never be able to forgive herself. With a deep breath and a newfound sense of resolve, Bailey discarded the tissue, washed her hands thoroughly, and walked straight toward Cole's office. His door was closed, but through the glass wall, she could see him sitting at his desk, staring intently at his computer screen, his face etched with an expression of profound exhaustion. She knocked softly. Cole looked up, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. For a moment, she thought he was going to wave her away, dismiss her with a curt gesture. Instead, he gestured for her to enter. Bailey opened the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Sir, I know you told me to stay in my lane. I know I'll probably get fired for this, but the iron smell is stronger now. You're paler than you were 2 days ago, and you're still holding your side." Cole's jaw tightened, his expression hardening. "I appreciate." "I'm serious," Bailey interrupted, her voice gaining an unexpected strength. "This isn't stress. Stress doesn't create that metallic scent. If you hit something, it could be bleeding internally, slowly, and if you don't get checked." "Bailey." His voice was quieter now, almost gentle, a stark contrast to his earlier dismissiveness. "I understand your concern, but I've been through worse. I know my body." "Do you?" Bailey's eyes locked with his, her voice unwavering. "Because my brother said the same thing, right up until he collapsed and nearly died." Something flickered across Cole's face, a fleeting expression of pain or recognition. Before he could respond, the door flew open with a loud bang, shattering the tense silence. Chad stood there, his face red with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. "Are you serious right now?" He looked from Bailey to Cole, his eyes blazing with fury. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I don't know why." "She was just leaving," Cole said quietly, his gaze fixed on Bailey. Chad grabbed Bailey's arm, not violently, but firmly, his grip unyielding. "Out, now." As she was pulled from the office, Bailey's eyes remained fixed on Cole's face, pleading with him silently. "Please," she thought desperately, "please listen." But Cole had already turned back to his computer screen, his face unreadable. That night, Bailey couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment, replaying the conversation endlessly in her mind. "You tried. That should be enough." But trying isn't enough if nobody listens. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Final warning. Stay away from executive staff or you're done. Chad." Bailey set the phone down on her nightstand and covered her face with her hands, her body trembling. "Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I should just quit before they fire me." But in her mind, she could still smell that haunting metallic scent, could still see Cole's hand pressing against his side when he thought nobody was watching. The next morning, Bailey discovered she had been reassigned yet again, a further demotion designed to break her spirit. Basement supply room, inventory management, no contact with anyone, ultimate invisibility. Mrs. Whitman found her during lunch, sitting in the dark storage room, surrounded by towering boxes, tears streaming down her face. "I tried," Bailey whispered, her voice barely audible. "I tried to help, and now I'm here. Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I really don't matter." Mrs. Whitman sat down beside her, her old bones creaking in protest. "You know what I learned in the army? The people who save lives aren't always the ones with medals. Sometimes they're the overlooked ones. The medics, the supply runners, the ones who notice what everyone else misses. Nobody believes me. That doesn't make you wrong." Mrs. Whitman squeezed Bailey's hand, her touch surprisingly strong. "I smelled that same iron smell in Iraq, on soldiers who pushed through until they couldn't anymore. You're not imagining this, child. That man is in real danger, and you might be the only one who knows." Bailey looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "But what can I do? I'm just—" "You're the one who sees," Mrs. Whitman said firmly, her gaze unwavering. "And sometimes that's the only thing that matters." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a promise, like the beginning of something that would irrevocably change everything. Friday evening, the building stood nearly empty, a vast, silent monument to ambition and success. Bailey had been assigned one final task before the weekend, a task that felt like a final humiliation, collecting trash from the executive level. A small mercy, perhaps, or just the cold logic of logistics. Either way, she moved through the quiet hallways with her cleaning cart, trying desperately not to think about Monday, when she would be permanently exiled to the basement. The overhead lights had dimmed to evening mode, casting long, eerie shadows across the polished floors. Her footsteps echoed through the silence, each footfall a reminder of her isolation. She was emptying the trash receptacle outside the small executive gym when she heard it. A metallic clatter, the unmistakable sound of something heavy falling to the floor, followed by an unnerving silence. Bailey froze, her hands still clutching the trash bag. The gym door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the darkened hallway. She should walk away, she told herself. Mind her own business. She'd already pushed too far, risked too much. But that sound, that metallic clatter. Bailey abandoned her cart and pushed the door open, her heart pounding in her chest. Cole lay sprawled on the floor, his body twisted against the weight bench, one hand gripping his left side in a desperate attempt to stem the bleeding. His face was drained of all color, his skin ashen, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. His breathing came in short, shallow gasps, each one a struggle for air. The iron smell was overwhelming, undeniable, terrifying. "Sir!" Bailey dropped to her knees beside him, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and concern. "Can you hear me?" Cole's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on her face. "Bailey, I thought it was nothing. How long have you been here?" 10. Maybe 15 minutes. He tried to sit up, his face contorting in pain. "Fell at the gym last week. Thought I just pulled something." Bailey's EMT training kicked in automatically, overriding her fear and uncertainty. She checked his pulse, finding it rapid and thready, a dangerous sign. His skin was cold and clammy to the touch. All the textbook signs, all the telltale indicators of internal bleeding. "You're bleeding internally?" she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the panic swirling inside her. "How hard did you fall? Did you hit something?" "Hit the bar on the way down." Cole's eyes started to close, his grip on his side weakening. "No, stay with me," Bailey said urgently, shaking him gently. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. Suddenly, the gym door burst open, and Chad stood there, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Call 911, Bailey shouted, her voice ringing with authority. "He's bleeding internally. He can die in minutes." The words exploded from Bailey with a force that surprised even her. This shy girl, who had never raised her voice at anyone, was suddenly shouting at the CEO's assistant with absolute conviction, her fear overridden by a fierce determination to save Cole's life. Chad froze, his face pale with fear. "Call 911 or I will," Bailey screamed, her voice echoing through the gym. Chad fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Bailey turned back to Cole, whose eyes were closing again, his breathing becoming more shallow and labored. No, stay awake," she pleaded, gently shaking his shoulder. "Look at me. What's your wife's name?" Pain flashed across his face, even through his deteriorating state, a raw, agonizing grief. "Emma. Tell me about her," Bailey urged, her voice soft but firm. She died because we waited too long," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Cancer. Caught it late. I thought she was just tired. I didn't see." Bailey's heart shattered into a million pieces. Suddenly, everything made sense, his refusal to see doctors, his insistence that he was fine, his denial of his own suffering. He blamed himself for missing his wife's illness, and now he was unconsciously repeating the same mistake, punishing himself with neglect. "Cole." She used his first name without thinking, her voice filled with compassion. "Emma wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you punishing yourself by ignoring what your body is telling you." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition, a dawning awareness. "How did you know?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "How did you see what I couldn't?" "Because I almost lost someone I loved, too," Bailey said softly, her eyes filled with empathy. "And I learned to notice the things most people miss." Chad was on the phone, his voice still shaky but regaining some composure. "Yes, this is an emergency. Executive Jim, Harrington Industries, 30th floor. Possible internal bleeding." Cole's hand found Bailey's, his grip weak but deliberate. "Don't leave," he whispered, his voice filled with fear. "I'm not going anywhere," Bailey promised, her voice unwavering, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The ambulance arrived within 7 minutes, the piercing wail of the siren shattering the silence of the empty building. Paramedics rushed into the gym, their movements swift and efficient, carrying equipment and a stretcher. Bailey stepped back to give them room to work, but Cole's hand reached for hers again, his grip surprisingly strong. "Tell them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell them what you noticed." Bailey spoke to the lead paramedic, her voice clear and steady, relaying the vital information he needed. "He fell at the gym a week ago, hit his side on a bar. He's been showing signs of internal bleeding for days. Pale skin, cold sweats, holding his left side. The metallic scent has been getting progressively stronger." The paramedic looked at her with newfound respect. "You have medical training?" "EMT student," Bailey replied. "Had to stop to care for my brother." "Well," the paramedic said, nodding grimly, "you probably just saved his life." They carefully loaded Cole onto the stretcher, securing him with straps. As they wheeled him toward the elevator, his eyes never left Bailey's face, his gaze filled with gratitude and a dawning understanding. Chad stood against the wall, ashen and shaken. For once, he had nothing to say. Mrs. Whitman appeared at the door, a security radio clutched in her hand. "Called it in as soon as I saw the commotion on the cameras," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Is he?" "He's going to be okay," Bailey said, her voice filled with hope, though a flicker of uncertainty lingered in her mind. "Thanks to you. You told me to believe in what I saw." The older woman smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're the one who had the courage to act, child." As the elevator doors closed, Bailey felt her legs give out beneath her. She sank heavily to the gym floor, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving her weak and trembling. Chad walked over to her slowly, his steps hesitant. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he did something unexpected, something that surprised even himself. He sat down beside her on the cold, hard floor. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice filled with remorse. "You were right about everything, and I was cruel." Bailey didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to this unexpected apology. "I thought you were manipulating him," Chad continued, his voice thick with emotion, "trying to get his attention. I've seen people try before. Fake emergencies, manufactured problems. I thought you were just another opportunist." "I just wanted to help," Bailey said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I know that now," Chad said, his voice breaking. "God, if he had died because I stopped you from—" "But he didn't," Bailey said softly, offering him a small measure of comfort. "He's going to be okay." The words hung between them, fragile, hopeful, and undeniably true. This heartwarming moment of understanding came too late to prevent the crisis, but just in time to heal something else: the prejudice, the blind ambition, and the ingrained biases that had nearly cost a man his life. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and stale, burned coffee, a sterile and unwelcome aroma. Bailey sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing her work uniform, feeling out of place amidst the hushed atmosphere. Chad had insisted on driving her to the hospital and now sat 3 seats away, scrolling through his phone with trembling hands, his anxiety palpable. Mrs. Whitman had stayed behind at Harrington Industries to file the incident report and preserve the security footage. "Evidence," she'd said with a knowing wink, "in case anyone tries to rewrite history." 2 hours crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity, before a doctor finally emerged from behind the closed doors. "Family of Cole Harrington?" He called out, his voice weary. Bailey and Chad both stood, their hearts pounding in their chests. The doctor glanced down at his clipboard, his expression softening slightly. "Are you?" "I'm his assistant," Chad said quickly, stepping forward. "And this is Bailey Morgan." She found him and called for help. The doctor's expression softened further. "Then you should know that he's stable. We caught it just in time." He paused, taking a deep breath. He had a slow bleed from a ruptured spleen, likely from the impact of the fall. He mentioned falling at the gym last week. Another hour, maybe 2, and he would have gone into hemorrhagic shock. We were able to repair it surgically. He'll make a full recovery. Bailey felt tears spring to her eyes, a wave of overwhelming relief washing over her so powerfully that she had to sit back down. "Can we see him?" Chad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's specifically asking for Bailey." Cole's hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the monitors, a rhythmic pulse of life. He looked smaller, more vulnerable, lying in the white sheets with 4 lines snaking into his arm. But his eyes were clear and alert when Bailey entered, and he managed a weak smile. "You were right," he said, his voice rough and scratchy from the breathing tube they had recently removed. "About everything." Bailey approached the bed slowly, her heart still pounding in her chest. "I'm just glad you're okay." "The doctor explained what would have happened if you hadn't found me," Cole said, his gaze fixed on her face. His hand moved across the blanket, reaching for hers. "If you hadn't been stubborn enough to keep trying, even when I pushed you away." Their fingers intertwined, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. "Most people would have just ignored it," he continued, his voice filled with gratitude. "After I dismissed you, after Chad threatened your job, most people would have walked away and said, 'I tried. My brother almost died because people ignored the signs,'" Bailey said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't let that happen to someone else, even someone who didn't want my help." Cole's grip tightened slightly on her hand. "I'm sorry for how I treated you, for not listening, for making you feel invisible when you were trying to save my life." "You were scared," Bailey said gently, offering him understanding and compassion. "You lost your wife because something was caught too late. You were afraid of being vulnerable again. I understand." Something in Cole's expression cracked, the walls that he had painstakingly built around his heart finally crumbling. "Emma used to tell me I had to stop controlling everything," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "She said life doesn't work that way, that sometimes you have to trust others to see things you can't." Tears slipped down his face, unchecked and unashamed. "I should have listened to her, and I should have listened to you." Bailey sat down in the chair beside his bed, her hand still clasped in his. "You're listening now. That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, their hands still connected, a silent promise of a future built on trust and understanding. "I want to make this right," Cole finally said, breaking the silence. "What Chad did, what the company did to you, that's unacceptable. You tried to save my life and got punished. That's going to change." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firm despite his weakened state, his gaze unwavering. "You deserve to be seen, Bailey, to be heard, to be valued. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did." The following Monday, the entire staff of Harrington Industries gathered in the main lobby, their faces etched with curiosity and anticipation. Cole stood at the front, still visibly recovering from his ordeal, but insisting on being there, his presence a testament to his newfound conviction. His left hand rested against his side, a subtle reminder of the ordeal he had endured, but his voice carried strength and resolve. "Most of you know what happened Friday," he began, his voice resonating through the hushed lobby. "I collapsed from internal bleeding that would have killed me if left untreated." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a collective intake of breath. "What you might not know is that Bailey Morgan tried to warn me 3 times. 3 times she noticed symptoms I ignored. 3 times she had the courage to speak up, even when it cost her professionally. The crowd murmured again, their faces a mixture of surprise and admiration. Bailey stood at the back of the lobby, her uniform feeling like a weight around her neck, wishing she could simply disappear. "Bailey Morgan saved my life," Cole continued, his voice ringing with gratitude. Not because she had to, not because it was her job, but because she paid attention when nobody else did, because she cared enough to act, even when it was uncomfortable, even when she was dismissed, belittled, and threatened. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, then fixing directly on Bailey, his eyes filled with sincerity. That kind of courage, that kind of awareness, that kind of compassion, that's what this company should value above everything else. Chad stepped forward, his face solemn and contrite. "I owe Bailey an apology," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "I misjudged her. I was prejudiced and cruel, and I let my own biases nearly cost someone their life. I'm sorry, Bailey. Truly deeply sorry." Nodded, tears streaming down her face. Effective immediately, Cole announced, his voice resonating with newfound conviction. "Bailey Morgan will be joining our newly formed employee wellness team." A collective murmur rippled through the room. "She'll be instrumental in developing programs that recognize health emergencies, offering vital support to colleagues in crisis, and, most importantly, ensuring that every single person in this building, from the highest-ranking executives to our dedicated cleaning staff, has a voice that's not just heard, but truly valued." The lobby erupted in thunderous applause, a wave of genuine appreciation washing over Bailey. This inspirational moment, born from Bailey's courageous act, underscored a powerful truth. Courage isn't confined to titles or positions. It resides in the willingness to act decisively when it matters most. 1 year later, the Employee Wellness Center, a testament to Bailey's impact, occupied a bright, window-filled space on the 15th floor. It was deliberately not relegated to some forgotten basement corner, but prominently placed where everyone could easily find it, a beacon of well-being within the corporate landscape. Bailey stood at the front of the training room, addressing 20 staff members from diverse departments, each eager to learn. Her ash-blonde hair flowed freely today, a departure from her usual tightly wound bun, and she wore a smart, professional outfit that exuded both confidence and approachability. Her ID badge, clipped neatly to her lapel, clearly identified her as Bailey Morgan, Wellness Coordinator. "The key to recognizing internal bleeding," she explained, her voice calm and measured, "isn't always about what you can readily see. Sometimes it manifests in subtle ways, a slight paleness, cold sweats that disproportionately favor one side of the body. And yes," she added, pausing for emphasis, "sometimes it's the iron smell, that faint metallic scent reminiscent of old pennies, a smell that often goes unnoticed." A hand shot up. It was Chad, the former office bully, his face etched with genuine curiosity. "Can anyone really learn to detect that?" he asked, his usual sarcastic tone replaced with earnest inquiry. Bailey smiled warmly. "If you consciously train yourself to notice it, yes, absolutely. Most people wouldn't instinctively recognize it, but with heightened awareness and practical experience, it becomes a familiar indicator." Chad nodded thoughtfully, scribbling furiously in his notebook. He'd become a regular fixture at every session she ran, completing his mandatory leadership and empathy training with a dedication that surprised everyone, himself included. He'd even started volunteering at a community health clinic on weekends, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. People could truly change, Bailey had learned, when given a real opportunity to do so. After the session, Chad approached her, a hint of sheepishness in his eyes. "There's a new hire starting on Monday," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "Young woman from facilities. She seems a little nervous about fitting in, you know? I thought maybe you could talk to her, help her feel welcome." Bailey's smile widened. "Of course. Thanks, Chad." Chad hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "And Bailey, that thing you said about noticing people who seem invisible, I've been practicing that. Actually seeing people I used to just walk past. It's eye-opening." "That's really good, Chad," Bailey said, her voice filled with genuine pride. At precisely 4 p.m., A gentle knock echoed on Bailey's office door. Cole stood there, a warm smile gracing his features, holding 2 steaming coffee cups. He'd made a remarkable recovery from his surgery, though the experience had undeniably changed him. He was more cautious now, more attuned to the world around him, and undoubtedly more human. "Break time?" he asked with a playful grin. "Only if you don't smell like iron," Bailey teased, her eyes twinkling with amusement. He laughed, a real, hearty laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Clean bill of health as of this morning's checkup. Scout's honor." They walked together to the building's rooftop terrace, a serene oasis renovated as a direct result of the wellness initiative. Employees could now escape the confines of their offices and take refreshing breaks surrounded by lush greenery and abundant natural light. "I heard your presentation to the board went exceptionally well," Cole remarked as they settled onto one of the benches, the cityscape stretching out before them. "They approved the expanded mental health resources," Bailey confirmed, a note of quiet satisfaction in her voice. "And the peer support program is slated to launch next quarter." "That's incredible, Bailey." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with undisguised admiration. "You're transforming this entire company." Bailey blushed, self-consciously tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm just trying to help people feel seen, Cole." "You're doing far more than that." Cole's voice softened, taking on a more intimate tone. "You're teaching us how to truly see each other, how to pay attention to the subtle cues, how to genuinely care." They sat in comfortable silence, the gentle breeze rustling through the nearby plants, watching the city unfold in its vibrant tapestry below. Suddenly, Mrs. Whitman, the former head of security, appeared from the rooftop door, the ever-present security radio clipped to her hip. She'd recently been promoted to security coordinator, now overseeing all the building's safety systems, a testament to her own dedication and competence. "Don't you two have work to do?" she called out, her voice laced with a playful grin. "We're on break, Mrs. Whitman," Bailey called back, laughing. "Aha, sure you are," Mrs. Whitman winked knowingly. "Just make sure you're back inside before sunset. Don't want people talking." She disappeared back inside, her chuckles echoing in the air. Cole and Bailey exchanged amused glances. "Everyone thinks we're together," Bailey observed, a hint of nervousness coloring her tone. "Would that be so terrible?" Cole asked quietly, his gaze intense. Bailey's heart skipped a beat. "I don't know, Cole. I'm still your employee." "You're my colleague," he corrected gently, reaching out to brush a stray leaf from her shoulder. "My friend, and honestly, someone I'd very much like to get to know better outside of these walls." Before Bailey could formulate a response, her phone buzzed insistently. A text message from her brother flashed across the screen. "Checkup went great. 6 months stable. Thanks for teaching me your observation tricks." She showed Cole the message, her face radiant with joy. "That's wonderful, Bailey," he said warmly, his eyes mirroring her happiness. Then, his voice softening, he added, "You save people, Bailey, not just physically. You help them see themselves differently, with new hope and potential. You certainly did that for me." Bailey met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of affection and admiration. "You saved yourself, Cole. I just noticed." "You did more than notice, Bailey. You cared. Even when it cost you everything." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "That's not something I'll ever forget." As the sun began its descent over the sprawling cityscape, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of amber and rose, Bailey experienced a profound realization. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not simply because someone had finally truly seen her, but because she'd finally found the courage to allow herself to be seen, to embrace her own worth and potential. And sometimes she thought that makes all the difference.